On a freezing night in Manhattan, hundreds of people hurried past the snow without a second glance. But one man, wealthy, powerful, and broken inside, stopped. There, on a park bench, he found a little girl in a torn pink dress, her lips trembling as she whispered the words no child should ever have to say. They said it was my fault. That moment, two strangers collided in a storm, and nothing would ever be the same again. This is not just a story about wealth or tragedy, it is about the power of compassion, the courage to face unbearable loss, and the healing that can come when one heart chooses not to walk away. If you believe in second chances, if you believe love can rise even from the coldest night, then stay with us. Subscribe to Loss and Healing and let this story remind you that hope still exists. The night was heavy with snow, each flake carried by a wind that cut through the city like a blade. Manhattan's streets, usually alive with color and sound, had become pale corridors of silence, muffled by the storm's relentless hand. Gavin Whitmore stood outside the glass doors of a ballroom, glowing with chandeliers. His jaw set hard, as though he had been holding the same expression for years. Inside, the air shimmered with false laughter, with silk gowns brushing against polished shoes, with the comfortable emptiness of people who had everything but never seemed to feel anything. A server had offered champagne, but Gavin had turned away. He was numb enough without it. He muttered an excuse to someone who did not matter, and walked away from the heat, stepping into the storm without a driver, without a plan. Snow rose quickly around his ankles, staining his shoes, yet it did not matter. In some strange way, the storm felt honest to him, like the city had been stripped bare of all pretense. Brutal, yes, but clean. He walked down Fifth Avenue, leather soles muffled against snow, until the looming shadows of Central Park appeared before him. He hesitated only a second before pushing forward. No one in their right mind entered the park in a blizzard. But Gavin was not searching for reason. He was searching for anything that could remind him he was still alive. His life was an empire, measured in glass and steel, his name etched into skylines and contracts worth billions. Yet inside, he carried only silence. 10 years earlier, the woman who had once filled that silence with warmth had been lost in an accident, and the guilt had wrapped around him ever since. He had convinced himself that business, power, and control could cover the hollow places. But grief is not a thing that leaves it buries itself, waiting for a night when the cold becomes unbearable and whispers return. As he moved deeper into the park, benches rose out of the snow like forgotten monuments. Lampposts flickered dimly, their glow swallowed by the storm. Gavin pulled his collar high, but the wind cut through wool and bone alike. He muttered into the storm as though someone might answer, "All this power, and I still feel cold." That was when he saw Eider thought he did. A shape slumped on a bench, so still it might have been a bundle of abandoned clothes. But as he drew closer, the storm revealed more. A child, small enough to look breakable, wrapped in nothing but a torn pink dress that clung damply to her knees. Her hair was matted with ice, her lashes white with frost. Her lips were cracked, tinged with blue, and her bare feet curled against the wood of the bench as though trying to escape the cold. In her arms, she clutched a battered blue canvas bag, hugging it tight against her chest like it contained the last thread of her existence. Gavin stopped. The sight pierced through his practiced detachment, in a way no headline or quarterly report ever could. He knelt in the snow, voice low, careful. "Hey, hey there." At first there was no response. Then, slowly, her eyelids fluttered, lashes trembling against frozen skin. Her lips parted, the faintest sound escaping into the storm. "They said it was my fault." The words struck Gavin harder than the wind ever could. He froze, breath caught in his chest, his mind torn open by the sound of a confession no child should carry. In boardrooms, he had heard denials. In courtrooms, he had heard accusations. But nothing had pierced him like that fragile voice. He moved without thinking, unbuttoning his heavy coat, wrapping it around her thin frame. She was weightless in his arms, her skin cold enough to burn. Still, she clutched the bag, fingers rigid as though it was the only thing anchoring her to life. He did not try to take it. Instead, he folded it into the coat with her, holding both as he lifted her from the bench. The park around them was empty, no sound but the scream of the storm and his own breath as he whispered, "Hold on, please, hold on." He ran, his steps carving desperate trails in the snow. The child's head lolled against his chest, her breath shallow, frighteningly faint. When the lights of the street reappeared and his driver skidded the car to the curb, Gavin barked one word: hospital. The engine roared, tires slipping across ice, and Gavin pressed her tighter against him. He whispered words he had not spoken in years, words of comfort, of promises he was not sure he could keep. "You're safe now. You'll be okay, I promise." Yet he knew those words were as much for himself as for her. Hours later, the fluorescent lights of a hospital waiting room hummed above him. His coat lay soaked across a chair, his clothes stiff with melted snow. He had not moved in over an hour because her words still echoed inside him. They said it was my fault. Again and again, until it scraped against the guilt he had carried for a decade. He remembered the night of the accident, the phone call that had kept him from being there, the thought he had buried. If only I had been with her, maybe she would still be alive. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand, asking if he was family. He shook his head slowly, his voice rough. "No, I just found her." But already, something in him had shifted. Because in truth, finding her was not an accident. It was a collision of two lives that needed saving. Hers from the cold, his from a silence that had become unbearable. And as he sat in that hospital, waiting for news of the girl who had whispered a confession into the storm, Gavin knew he could not simply walk away. The pediatric wing was quiet except for the low hum of machines and the muted footsteps of nurses. Behind the glass, Gavin watched the small figure on the bed, barely distinguishable under layers of warming blankets. The girl's pale hair spread across the pillow in damp tangles. Her thin arm curled protectively around the blue canvas bag. Even as the doctors inserted IV lines, even as the monitors beeped steadily, her hand never loosened. That bag was not simply fabric and stitching. It was her anchor, her history, her fragile proof that she existed and belonged somewhere. When Gavin was finally allowed into her room, he moved carefully, lowering himself into a chair beside her bed. For a long time, he did not speak. He simply sat, his large frame awkward in the small space, his eyes tracing the rise and fall of her breath. The quiet pressed against him, reminding him of nights he had once spent alone in his penthouse, staring into glass walls, haunted by everything unsaid. But this silence felt different. It was waiting. Her lashes fluttered, then her eyes opened just slightly, cautious and mistrustful. She stared at him as though weighing danger. He tilted his head, lowering his voice. "I am not mean," he said softly. The faintest recognition flickered in her gaze, and she whispered, hoarse but clear enough, "Not like the others." Something long buried inside him cracked open. That a child so small could already measure cruelty by the look in someone's eyes broke him in ways he could not explain. He asked her name, but she did not answer. Instead, she pulled the bag closer and, with trembling fingers, unzipped it. Gavin did not stop her. He watched as she drew out a one-eyed teddy bear, its fur worn to threads, and a water-damaged notebook with edges frayed. Finally, from its center, she unfolded a sheet of paper and placed it on her lap. She did not hand it to him. She simply looked away. He leaned forward gently. "May I see?" She shrugged almost imperceptibly. Gavin unfolded the fragile page with care. The handwriting was uneven, childlike, but each word cut straight to him. "Dear lady, if someone finds me, my name is Laya. Please don't blame me. I tried to be good. My mom said, don't trust uniforms. She said, run if they come back. I do not know where she is now. Please don't throw my bag away. It has our life in it." His throat closed, his vision blurred. A man who had once negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation now found his hands trembling over a piece of paper written by a child begging the world not to discard her. He looked back at her. She was watching him carefully as though daring him to confirm her worst fear. He shook his head slowly. "No one is blaming you," he said. "Not for anything." She did not respond, but she did not look away either. For Gavin, that was enough. He repeated her name aloud, Laya, testing the sound. She gave the smallest nod. It was a fragile thread, but it was connection. He stayed with her until a nurse returned, then stepped out reluctantly, lingering at the window as she curled once more around her bag. Through the night, Gavin remained in the waiting room, refusing to leave even when exhaustion pressed against him. He thought of her words. They said it was my fault, and of his own unspoken confession after his wife's accident. If only I had not taken that call. Guilt had been his shadow for 10 years, but hearing it echoed from the lips of a 5-year-old, shattered something inside him. The next morning, he was summoned to a small consultation room where a social worker introduced herself as Claire Monroe. Petite, composed, with eyes that had clearly seen more than most would ever want to, she wasted no time. She spoke of procedure, of the system, of how children like Leia did not need fleeting emotions but permanence, stability. Gavin listened, aware that she was testing him, weighing his intentions. He admitted that he had no formal connection to the child, that he had simply found her in the park. Yet, he also admitted he had not left since. Claire studied him with practiced caution. She reminded him that many people feel moved in moments like this, but few stay when the headlines fade. Gavin's response was quiet but steady. This is not about appearances. I will not walk away. That afternoon, he returned to Leia's room. She was awake now, sitting up in her oversized hospital gown, her small face still wary. He tried again, speaking gently about her name, about the woman Claire who wanted to help. She did not answer. Instead, she tightened her hold on the bag as if it might vanish. Gavin asked carefully about her mother. The shift was immediate. Her shoulders curled, her chin dropped, her silence heavy with fear. He apologized quickly, telling her she did not have to speak. But after a long pause, she whispered, "She said hide." Those words chilled him more than the storm outside ever could. He pressed softly, "Hide from who?" But she closed herself again, retreating into silence. Gavin stayed anyway, choosing presence over pressure. Later, Claire confirmed his fears.
It is okay.
There were rumors, whispers of children missing, of mothers running from threats that never reached official reports. She told him Leia needed consistency, not panic. Gavin met her eyes and answered with quiet certainty, "Then I am not going anywhere." That night, he sat once more beside Leia's bed. The blue bag was tucked under her chin, her breathing shallow but steady. He watched her sleep, her small form curled against a world that had already demanded too much of her. And just before her breathing deepened, she murmured again in her sleep, "Mama said hide if he came back." Gavin leaned forward, whispering almost to himself, "Whoever he is, Leia, I promise you, he will never find you again." The words were a vow, not just to her, but to himself, to the man he used to be, to the man he had to become. For the first time in years, he felt as though his life had been pulled onto a path that mattered. Not for business, not for power, but for a child who had been told the world was her fault. And he would prove to her, one choice at a time, that it was not. The morning sky over Yonkers was a dull gray, stretched flat, as if someone had painted it without depth or light. Gavin stood with the collar of his coat pulled high, breath curling into the cold air as he surveyed the industrial lot before him. Rust clung to the fence that surrounded it, weeds climbing through broken asphalt. It was not a place that belonged to anyone. And yet here, his private investigator, Frank, believed they had uncovered the first thread that could lead them to answers. The van sat crooked under a sagging carport, its white paint dulled by years of grime. One back axle leaned lower than the other, as though the vehicle itself carried a burden too heavy. Frank pried open the door with a crowbar, the sound of breaking ice loud in the silence. The stench that rolled out was immediate temeldew, sweat, something metallic that made Gavin's stomach twist. He forced himself forward. He had promised Leia. He had whispered to her that he would not let her be alone. That meant facing whatever truth waited here. Inside the van, a cracked booster seat sat abandoned between crumpled juice boxes. A torn fleece blanket lay bunched against the floor, and caught in the hinge of a seatbelt was a scarf. Pale blue, delicate, embroidered along the edge. Gavin reached out with trembling hands, pulling it free. The sight of it hit him like a fist. He knew it belonged to Sarah Quinn, Leia's mother. Frank moved to the back, pulling open the trunk to reveal scattered papers, damp and curling at the edges. Among them, Gavin found a folded flyer for a women's shelter in Yonkers. Sarah's name was written in the applicant line. The date was recent. She had been seeking safety. She had tried. And yet, she had vanished. Gavin tucked the scarf carefully into his coat, his chest heavy with the realization. "She was here," he muttered. His voice was rough, not from the cold, but from the weight of helplessness pressing down. Frank nodded grimly. This was not abandonment. Someone scared her away. Or worse. Back at the hospital, Gavin entered Leia's room with the scarf folded in his hand. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed, a coloring book in her lap, crayons scattered like fragile pieces of normal childhood. Her eyes lifted when he approached, wary but steady.
I will protect
He
you.
sat down, placing the scarf gently on the blanket. Her hands froze around the crayon. Then, slowly, she reached out. "That is Mama's," she whispered, her voice breaking. She pressed it to her chest, tears filling her eyes. "She always wore it. She said blue was brave." Gavin's throat tightened. He told her about the van, about the blanket and the papers. He told her Sarah had been trying to reach safety. Laya nodded through tears. She said if we could not find a shelter, we would sleep in the car. She said if someone came, I had to hide and stay quiet. Her words came haltingly, but each carried a weight far heavier than her small shoulders should bear. When Gavin asked if Sarah had been running from someone, Laya nodded. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He had a badge. He said he was from child protection, but Mama said he was not real. She said he was dangerous. Gavin clenched his jaw, fury coiling inside him. He had heard of predators, but to use the disguise of a protector to target those already vulnerable was monstrous. Later, Claire met him in the hallway, her expression darkening as he relayed what Laya had said. "We have heard whispers," she admitted. "Men impersonating child services, convincing women to leave shelters, promising safety, then disappearing with them. No official names, no arrests. Just missing families."
Mama said not
Gavin's voice was low, tight with resolve. "Then it ends now." Claire studied him carefully, reminding him that anger could not replace patience, that children needed consistency more than crusades. But Gavin did not waver. "She will not be failed again. Not while I am here." In the days that followed, Frank dug deeper. The name that surfaced was Bradley Hale, once a soldier, later discharged for manipulations too cruel even for war. Now he lived in the cracks of systems meant to protect. No convictions, no fingerprints traceable in the right places. He was a ghost who preyed on the invisible. And Sarah Quinn had been one of his targets. The revelation burned inside Gavin. He had built towers, corporations, entire blocks of the city. He had thought power was measured in how much you owned, how high you could climb. But here was a child clinging to a bag, whispering about monsters with badges, and he realized true power was something else entirely. It was showing up. It was not walking away when everyone else did. One night, Gavin found Laya asleep with the scarf curled in her hands. Beside her was the battered teddy bear, patched clumsily, its single eye watching over her. He stood by the bed, watching her chest rise and fall. And he thought of Sarah. Somewhere out there, a mother had fought to protect her child and perhaps had paid with her life. Gavin whispered into the quiet, "She will be safe. I swear it." His words were not empty. They were the start of something irreversible. Because in that moment, Gavin Whitworth, a man who once drowned his guilt in skyscrapers, and silence decided that his fight was no longer about business or reputation. It was about a girl who had been told it was her fault. And he would prove, no matter how long it took, that it never was. Snow fell in fine, steady flakes, the kind that blurred the horizon and softened the edges of the world. Gavin stood near the chain-link fence of a desolate property upstate, his coat pulled tight, the air biting at his face. Frank, his investigator, had found the place after weeks of tracing false identities and abandoned leads. A hunting lease on paper. In reality, a stretch of land that no one claimed, no one visited. A place where someone could vanish and never be found. The trailers on the property were half hidden beneath canvas tarps and dried brush, blending into the winter landscape. Frank pointed with a gloved hand. "We have eyes on him. Hale is inside. Supplies went in, but no one came out. We have seen kids. At least 2. Their condition, uncertain." Gavin's breath came heavy, his stomach twisting as he imagined the children trapped in the cold metal boxes. His hands curled into fists. "Call the sheriff," he said. Frank nodded. "Already did. They want you nowhere near it." But Gavin could not shake the feeling that he should be there, that he owed it to Laya, to Sarah, to all the families who had disappeared without anyone noticing. His voice was rough, almost a growl. "Tell me when." Frank's eyes softened with unease. "You are not thinking straight. This is law enforcement territory." Gavin did not answer. He only stared at the trailers, his jaw locked with the weight of a promise. Back at the hospital, the minutes dragged like hours. Gavin sat in the garden, snow dusting his shoulders as he waited for Frank's call. Claire found him there, her expression weary but steady. "You cannot carry this alone," she said. "This system is broken, but it is all we have. If you push too hard, you risk everything, including Laya." Gavin's gaze remained on the darkening sky.
Sarah Miller.
She does not care about jurisdiction or patience. She only wants to know the monster will never come back. Claire's silence stretched before she finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" Gavin turned to her, his voice low. "Because I know what it is to lose someone and to blame yourself every day after. I will not let her live with that same weight." Claire studied him, then placed an envelope in his hand. "Emergency guardianship. If the court approves, you will be her protector until her mother is found or declared otherwise."
May it please the
Gavin
court.
nodded, his grip steady. "Thank you." That night he sat beside Laya's bed once more. She was curled on her side, the blue scarf wrapped around her teddy bear, the lavender notebook open nearby. A new drawing rested on the table. It showed him holding a flashlight, guiding her
And
through a
do you
forest
remember
thick
what
with
happened at the
shadows.
hospital?
In the corner,
Yes,
a
they kept
small
me safe.
figure with a scarf stood behind a tree,
Why did
labeled
she go
Mama.
there?
Gavin's chest ached as he studied it.
Mama told her to
Children should draw castles and dragons,
Do you see the
not
man behind you in the
warnings etched in
courtroom today?
crayon. He whispered,
Yes.
"Whoever he is, he will not take you again." "That is my vow."
Objection, Your
Hours
Honor.
later, his
He is
phone
too
vibrated.
young.
Frank's voice was quiet but urgent. "The
Objection
deputies are moving
overruled.
in now. 3 trailers. We saw movement inside. Could be kids." Gavin's grip tightened. And Hale? Still there, sitting inside like he owns the place,
Don't
coffee
remember.
on the table. Calm, as if he is waiting. Gavin pressed a hand against his forehead, anger and disbelief colliding.
I know it may
"Tell
be
me the
difficult
second
to
it is
believe,
over."
but I am
The
telling
wait
you the
felt
truth.
endless. Gavin paced the hospital parking
So you're
lot,
saying that the
boots
badge-
crunching
the
against
badge that you're
ice.
wearing is
Finally,
what color
Frank's
exactly?
voice returned.
It's
He is in custody. Deputies breached. Found children.
He
One
lied.
alive.
he was
Two
not there
not.
to help.
Gavin stopped, his chest hollowing
Thank
at the
you, you may step
words.
down.
The
Thank you,
storm
Your
in
Honor.
his lungs was colder than any winter wind. And Hale? He barely blinked, said, "Took you long enough," did not resist. Gavin closed his eyes. A monster
You did
caught,
not
but at what
win.
cost? How many mothers and children had vanished before someone finally listened? He whispered a single word into the phone, "Thank you," and looked up toward the hospital windows. Somewhere above, Laya was asleep, unaware of the shift that had just occurred. The man who had haunted her was no longer free.
It is over now.
The following morning, the courthouse was
yet,
cold and
but soon.
impersonal, its brick walls holding more silence than justice. Gavin sat outside the courtroom, Laya between him and Claire. She wore a small navy dress, her hair braided neatly, her blue bag gripped tight in her lap. Her boots tapped nervously against the wooden bench. Gavin leaned down. "Are you scared?" She nodded slightly. "That is okay. You do not have to be brave all the time. You only have to be honest." When her name was called, she looked to him for reassurance. He knelt so their eyes met. "You have got this, kiddo." She nodded and walked forward, her small hand still wrapped around the strap of the bag. Inside the courtroom, the man who had pretended to be her savior sat cuffed at the defense table. His posture relaxed, his expression void of shame. For the briefest moment, his eyes found hers. He smirked. The prosecutor requested that Laya be allowed a support guardian. The judge granted it, and Gavin took his place beside her at the stand. He did not speak. He only offered presence, something solid for her to lean on. The questions began gently.
You are rude.
Did she remember the hospital? Why had she gone
that
there?
good?
Laya's voice was quiet but clear enough. "Because Mama told me to run." She was asked about the man. She identified Hale without hesitation, pointing at the photo, then at the defendant. The defense attorney objected, citing her age, but the judge allowed it. Then came the most difficult question. "What happened the last time you saw your mother?" Laya's hands twisted in her lap. She whispered,
Mama.
"She told me to hide. She locked the car doors. She went out to talk to him. She did not come back." The courtroom stilled, the weight of her words pressing into the silence. The defense tried to shake her, asking if she remembered the badge, the words, the details. She faltered for a moment, then raised her voice stronger than anyone expected. He lied. He was not there to help. The judge dismissed her with gentle thanks. As she stepped down, passing the defense table, she stopped. Her eyes met Hale's, and in a voice clear and unwavering, she said,
Are
"You did
certain
not
about
win."
This decision you are making?
Then she walked out, her head high. Outside the courtroom,
She
Claire
cannot go
hugged her
back into the
tightly.
system, and she
Gavin
needs
knelt again,
permanence.
brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked at him with
Money
quiet
does not
steadiness.
fix trauma.
"Do you think it is over now?" He swallowed, then whispered, "Not yet."
Simply put,
But soon.
yes.
In that moment, As sunlight streamed weakly through the courthouse windows, Gavin understood something deeper than any vow. This was no longer about guilt, or redemption, or even justice. It was about permanence. It was about proving to a little girl that she was not at fault, that she was not disposable, that someone had chosen to stay. And no matter what came next, he would not walk away. The days after the trial blurred into a rhythm that felt both fragile and strangely new. Gavin no longer split his time between boardrooms and penthouses. Instead, he split it between waiting rooms, bedside chairs, and conversations that seemed to change him with every passing hour. Laya was recovering, but her world had been shattered too many times to heal quickly. She still kept the blue bag within reach, her arms curling around it at night as though it were armor. The hospital suite was not built for permanence, yet Gavin had turned it into something close to a home. He insisted on a room with wide windows so that light could pour in. He told the nurses it was for her health, but in truth, he knew Laya liked to watch the clouds drift by, searching for shapes, almost as if she expected messages hidden in them. Her drawings multiplied, pinned to the wall and tucked into the lavender notebook he had given her. Dragons, castles, forests, but always a scarf or a blue star hidden somewhere in the picture. Every evening, Gavin read aloud to her. At first, she did not react, her face careful and closed. But gradually, she began to request story always, the ones with dragons. Gavin gave them voices, some clumsy, some ridiculous, and when she finally laughed, the sound startled him. It was rare, light as glass, but it filled the room with a warmth that even the radiator could not match. Claire visited regularly, observing with the kind of gaze that measured not just the child, but Gavin himself. She watched him crouch on the floor, helping Leia with puzzles. She saw him pace less and sit more, his restlessness replaced by a strange calm. One evening, she paused in the doorway as Gavin made up a tale about a dragon who sneezed sparks every time it rained. Leia giggled, her small hands clapping in delight. Claire whispered almost to herself, "You are not pacing anymore. You are rooted." Gavin looked up. "Is that good?" Claire smiled faintly. "For both of you, yes." Later that night, Leia handed him a piece of paper folded with care. "It is for you," she said, her voice shy. He opened it and found a crayon drawing 3 figures holding hands. A girl with blonde hair, a woman with a scarf, and a man in a dark suit with strangely flat hair. Gavin chuckled softly. "That is me?" Leia nodded. "Your hair is hard to draw." He smiled, but his chest ached when she pointed at the middle figure.
This is so
"That
much
is Mama."
fun.
She grew quiet then, her gaze too old for her years. "I do not think she got away." Gavin folded the drawing carefully, tucking it into his coat as though it were a sacred artifact. He leaned down, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "We are not done yet." The next morning, paperwork awaited him in the hospital's legal office. Guardianship, custody, medical proxy. Pages that could alter the course of both their lives. Claire sat across from him, her expression steady. "You are serious about this? This is not a one-week commitment." Gavin did not hesitate. "She cannot go back into the system. Not after everything. She needs more than survival. She needs permanence." Claire nodded, her voice quieter than usual. "When you realize that no amount of money can fix trauma, I will still be here." He met her gaze and replied simply, "So will I." A few hours later, Gavin stopped by the hospital gift shop. He returned with a lavender notebook decorated with silver stars. Handing it to Leia, he said, "For your stories. Not just the scary ones, but the ones with dragons too." Her fingers brushed the cover as she asked, "Will you read them when I write?" Gavin's voice softened. "Every single one." That night she fell asleep with the notebook clutched to her chest. Gavin sat by the window, city lights blinking faintly in the distance. For years, those lights had represented business, empire, power. But tonight, they seemed irrelevant. What mattered was the girl asleep in the bed behind him, the fragile sound of her breathing steady at last. The following days brought new developments. Claire's department uncovered more about Hale, his string of false names and forged credentials. They discovered patterns of women applying for shelter and then vanishing before intake was complete. Each case whispered of fear, each one a wound left unhealed.
Dad?
Gavin listened, his resolve hardening. He
sorry.
knew now that he was not simply caring for Leia. He was stepping into a battle against a system that allowed predators to thrive in the shadows.
I
One afternoon, Leia sat with her coloring pencils spread across the bed. She drew a forest, heavy with shadows, and a man with stiff hair and a false badge hanging from his neck. She handed the picture to Gavin. "That is him," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. Gavin held the drawing carefully, anger simmering in his chest. He looked at her and said, "You were very brave. You survived. That is more than enough." At night, when the halls of the hospital quieted, Gavin would walk to the chapel. He was not a man of faith, not anymore. But in that dim, echoing space, he found himself whispering promises he did not know how to stop making. Promises to Sarah, to Laia, to himself, that he would not walk away, that he would not fail her. One evening, as snow began to fall outside once more, Claire found him seated in the garden. He looked older, more worn, but also more grounded. She told him quietly that emergency guardianship was likely to be approved. "If it is," she said, "you will be responsible for her in ways that do not pause or end. This is not charity. This is fatherhood." Gavin met her gaze, steady. "Then I am ready." Later, he returned to Laia's room. She was already asleep, her notebook resting open beside her, pages filled with uneven lines of crayon words. Gavin sat down, flipping to the latest page. It was a story about a girl with a blue star who found a safe house guarded by dragons. He closed the notebook gently, set it back on the table, and looked at her. "You are safe now," he whispered, "and you will never have to be alone again." In that moment, as snow tapped softly against the hospital windows, Gavin felt something he had not known in years. Not just responsibility, not just guilt or grief, but something deeper, something whole. It was the beginning of family. Spring came late that year. The Hudson Valley thawed slowly, as though winter was reluctant to release its grip. Fields of snow shrank into patches of damp earth, and the air softened with the faint promise of warmth.
Hello, dear.
At Gavin's estate outside
your
Terrytown,
grandmother.
the grounds were stirring back to life. Birds filled the woods with tentative songs. Branches stretched with new buds, and yet the most profound transformation had already taken place inside the stone walls of his home. The great room glowed with firelight in the evenings. Once austere with leather chairs and dark wood, it now bore the marks of a different kind of life.
This is your
Bright rugs
possible
softened the
grandma.
floor. Bins of colored
my.
pencils sat near the hearth, and children's books leaned sideways on shelves that had once only held business journals. On the mantel above the fireplace rested a walnut shadow
This was sewn
box.
by my mother
Inside
when
it,
she was
carefully mended and preserved, was the blue canvas bag. Once it had been a symbol of
Mama
fear
told
and
me
survival,
blue was
dragged through
brave.
storms and hospital corridors. Now it was displayed like a flag of resilience, a reminder that the past did not have to vanish to lose its
smelled
power.
like Mama's
Laia was
coat.
often on the rug in front of the fire, arranging toy animals in
like her?
elaborate stories. Her cheeks were fuller now, her eyes brighter. She still carried her lavender notebook everywhere,
Can
its
I still
pages
stay
filling with
here?
drawings and tales about dragons and stars, about mothers who sewed blue scarves, and about a man with strange hair who always
Remember
found
me
his way
when I'm
back.
gone.
Gavin often watched her in quiet awe. It was not the grand gestures that undid him, but the small ones, the way she hummed while coloring, the way she pressed a crayon too hard and then laughed, the way she began to let her guard down. Claire had become a steady presence as well. At first, she came as a caseworker, clipboard in hand, evaluating progress and stability. But gradually,
long
her
enough.
visits changed. She began staying for dinners, sharing cocoa on the couch, helping Laia bake cookies on Saturday afternoons. The boundaries of title blurred, and what remained was something simpler. Family created not by blood, but by choice and constancy. One evening, as Gavin stirred cocoa on the stove, a knock sounded at the door. He frowned, unused to visitors this far from town. When he opened it, a woman stood on the porch, her coat quilted, her hands clutching a large envelope. She introduced herself
How much
softly.
does this cost?
"My name is June Lake.
This one is on sale.
I believe I am Leia's grandmother." Her words landed heavy,
can tell you right
reverberating
here.
with recognition. Gavin had seen her name in a letter weeks earlier, written after the trial coverage had aired. She had recognized the blue bag in a photograph, explaining she had sewn it for her daughter Sarah when she was 17.
Could I get your name,
Gavin
please?
stepped aside gently.
No,
"Please, come in." June entered slowly, her gaze sweeping
That's
across
my
the home.
bag.
She did not marvel at its size or the stonework. only at the warmth inside the drawings taped to the refrigerator,
Now
the
I
smell
only
of
carry
cocoa,
good parts.
the soft glow of firelight. When Laya appeared in the doorway, cautious,
this,
clutching her
everyone.
notebook,
Those look
Gavin
so
knelt.
good. I want
"Sweetheart,
the red
this is
one."
June. She knew your mother when she was your age. She might be your grandma." For a long moment, the little girl did not move. Then June knelt too, pulling something
Snow
small
gone
from
bad.
her
Still
pocket.
here, but different
A
now.
blue fabric star, frayed at the edges. "Your mama made this when she was about your age. We used to sew together whenever she was nervous. She always said blue was brave." Leia's eyes filled. She reached out slowly, touching the star with trembling fingers. "She told me that too," she whispered. June's mouth trembled. She never stopped believing it. That night, after cocoa and quiet conversation, Gavin
Some
tucked
say
Laya
resilience
into
is like a
bed.
well-worn bag.
She wore an
Always ready for
oversized
the
red
journey.
t-shirt.
Always holding what
Her
matters
teddy bear
most.
nestled under her arm. She looked at him with solemn eyes. "She smelled like Mama's coat," she whispered about June. Gavin brushed hair from her forehead. "Did you like her?" Laya nodded. Then she asked the question that broke him open. "Can I still stay here?"
Oh, you
Gavin
messed it up.
swallowed hard, his voice rough. "Always."
Oh, thank
A
you.
pause, then a softer question. "Can I call you Dad now?" The word struck him deeper than any deal, any vow, any oath he had ever spoken. He nodded, unable to stop the tears that blurred his vision. "I have been waiting my whole life to hear that." Laya smiled sleepily, closed her eyes, and curled tighter into the blankets. Gavin stepped into the hall where Claire waited. She arched an eyebrow.
this.
"She called you Dad?"
That's
He
really
nodded,
good.
still raw with emotion. Claire gave a small smile.
I promise
Took
to
her
read
long
every
enough.
Story.
Weeks later, at the spring fair in town, Gavin watched Leia help June tie ribbons to a tree covered in paper butterflies. She wore a pale yellow dress. Her notebook
This is
clutched
such a
under her
lovely day
arm.
for a picnic.
A local photographer
I'm so
asked for
glad we came
names,
out.
Me
but
too.
Gavin
The
shook his
sandwiches
head.
are great.
Laya, however, pointed proudly to the blue canvas bag displayed in a booth nearby. "That was mine. It used to hold my whole life. Now I only carry the good parts." That evening, by the fire at home, Gavin opened his own notebook. Not the kind filled with numbers or contracts, but one he had begun for
This
himself.
tastes good.
He wrote,
Oh,
"The
I'm
snow
glad
is
you like
gone. The bag
Can
is
I have
still
more?"
here, but it is different now. It is not heavy. It is not haunted. It is history. She told me it reminds her she is safe. And for me, it reminds me who I became the night I found her." He looked up at the shadow box, the bag framed like a
With
relic of
mighty roar,
survival.
the dragon said,
Behind him,
"You will
laughter
never
echoed
defeat
down
me."
the hall. And for the first time in his life, Gavin Whitmore, who had once built towers to escape his grief, no longer needed skyscrapers to feel tall. He had a family, and they were home. There are stories that begin in the grand halls of power, under chandeliers and cameras, where wealth speaks louder than silence. And then there are stories that begin in the snow, with a child no one else noticed, whispering words that should never belong to someone
I
so
promise
young.
to keep her safe.
Laya's story did not start in comfort or safety. It began in fear, in loneliness, in a desperate clutch around a blue canvas bag that held everything she thought was left of her life.
Dad?
And yet, out of that cold night, something extraordinary was born. Gavin had spent years building monuments of glass and steel, convinced that success could quiet the guilt that had hollowed him out. But grief is not silenced by wealth.
Here are your
It
pancakes,
lingers,
sweetie.
waits, and
Thank you,
reminds
Daddy.
us in the quietest hours that we are still human. When he found Laya on that bench,
doing it.
her breath shallow, her words breaking the air like glass, he thought he was saving her. What he could not see then was that she was saving him too. Their journey was not easy.
Great.
The shadows of predators, the weight of unanswered questions, the ache of loss, all of it followed them. But step by step, night by night, promise by promise, they built something new. It was not about perfection. It was about presence.
I can do
About being there again and again until trust slowly replaced fear. The bag that once carried only survival now hangs above a fireplace, not as a wound but as a witness. A reminder that even in the bleakest winters, even when the world whispers blame into the ears of a child, compassion can change everything. It can rewrite stories. It can turn loss into healing. And perhaps that is the lesson we are meant to carry with us. That one act of kindness, one decision not to walk away,
Snow
can create
looks
ripples
different
that last a
now.
lifetime. That healing is not found in erasing pain, but in choosing to stand
It means
beside someone
new
in it.
beginnings.
That family is not always given, but it can be made, piece by piece, choice by choice, until a child, who once believed it was her fault, can look up and say, "Can I call you Dad now?" If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you that even in the coldest nights hope can still find a home, then
I
let
love
it
you more
not
than
end
anything.
here. Share it, let others feel the warmth, and
That
join
was
us in
really fun,
creating a
thank
community
you.
where stories
You
of
are
compassion
welcome.
are not forgotten. Subscribe to Loss and Healing, and together, let us keep
And that
telling
is the
stories that
story of how
remind
our
the
family
world what
found
it
its way
means to
home.
notice, to stay, and to love.